welcome to Down the Road. Obviously, the big news since the last time we had a chance to visit was in regards to Roe v. Wade. The leak that came out of the Supreme Court that everybody's trying to find out where it came out. I have no doubt they will. But, lost in all of that is, of course, the big news that Roe v. Wade, if this continues the way it is, if this opinion has the majority, which it appears it does, will be overturned. Amy Jacobson is going to join us a little bit later. She's the executive director of Prairie Action. And we're going to talk with her about the reaction to news that the Supreme Court is poised to turn this thing over. But Emily Guskin is a polling analyst with the Washington Post, which means that all those numbers that we get, which you can talk about polling all you want, the fact of the matter is politicians use polls, America use polls because polls work. They do. You can talk about, okay, many of you are saying if polls were accurate, Donald Trump never would have been president. Go back and look at the polls and see what the polls told you. See within when we talk about margin of error. So polls are scientific and they work. I'm a believer. Emily is a polling analyst with the Washington Post. So let's visit with her. Emily, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Thanks for having me.
A lot of people are curious about where America is at with this decision that the Supreme Court is about to make. I know that you have polling data on that. What does it tell you?
So last week we were in the field with a national poll, and we found that by about a 2-to-1 margin, Americans say that we should uphold the Roe versus Wade decision as opposed to overturning it. That's been pretty consistent in years of polling, with about a 2-to-1 margin saying that we should uphold Roe.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Emily. When you look at that and you look at the data, I want to make sure that people, as they look at this, and many people that are watching us right now are pro-life. They might not agree with that. Explain to them how you came to that data, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So we do a national sample of Americans. So anyone who has a telephone number, whether that's a cell phone or a landline, has a randomly equal chance of being selected to pick up the telephone. When you pick up the telephone, there's a person on the other end asking questions that we write, and we try to write them as fairly and as balanced and as clear and easy to understand as possible. And after about 4 days of polling, this time we had 1,004 interviews, and we get the data back and we get to analyze them. A lot of these questions we've asked many times over many years, so we've got a nice trend line, and that means we don't change our question wording. But sometimes we ask new questions, like this time we asked questions about a 6-week abortion ban or a 15-week abortion ban, which we hadn't asked before, so we worked new question wording in there. 75% of the people we talked to in this survey were reached via cell phone, and the remaining 25% on landline. Just to give an idea of how this method has changed over time, we do spend more time talking to people on cell phones than landlines now.
So when you asked the questions, were you specific in the questions? Was there more than one question? Whether or not, for example, you think Roe v. Wade should be overturned? Go ahead.
So we had a few different questions. I just pulled up the top line, which is nice that we're doing this on a computer so I can look at it. We asked a question that we've been asking since 1995, and that was, do you think abortion should be legal in all cases, legal in most cases, illegal in most cases, or illegal in all cases, which, as you can see, is a pretty fairly balanced question. And this time we found 58% saying either legal in all cases or most cases, and 37% saying illegal in either all cases or most cases. So, and that number has been pretty stable over time. The question we just discussed before of whether to uphold or overturn was worded, as you may know, abortion law in the United States is based on the 1973 U.S. Supreme Court ruling known as Roe versus Wade. Do you think the Supreme Court should uphold Roe v. Wade or overturn it? And we actually asked that question 2 different ways. So a random half sample got overturned first and then uphold second, and the other half got uphold first and overturned second, so that there would be no bias in that question when it was randomized.
And what did you find after it was inversed? What did you find? Did the numbers mirror each other on both ways that the question was asked?
I didn't analyze that for this, but there's a research that has been done in polling that called the recency effect, and that sometimes people will choose the last word that they heard when they respond to stuff. So one way to avoid such an effect is to reverse or randomize the order of responses in a question, and that's something that's we do as a standard in our polling.
Okay, but you don't know, no matter which way you ask the question, if you ask the legal side last or the legal side first, you don't know if there was a separation between those two?
I didn't do that analysis this
Okay.
time, but generally there is something like that, which is why we do that flip. We also did it for the question about whether people's states should make it easier for women to have access to abortion or harder. We switched the word easier and harder in that question as well. And we found very similar findings in that one this time than we did in 2019, with about a third of Americans saying they think it should be easier for women in their state to have abortions, and about a quarter saying it should be harder, with slightly more, like 36%, saying that it should be left as it is.
Okay, so, did the questions stay there? Obviously, when you get into polling, and believe me, being involved in politics all my life and having a sister that served in the United States Senate, I've been around a poll or two, and I've seen how the questioning works. But did you get more specific in regards to other questions later on in the poll once you had them, or did you decide to get to the issue right away?
Yeah, we asked a bunch of questions in this poll. We had some space to ask more deep down questions. One question I thought was pretty interesting that we asked this time was we asked everyone whether or not their state recently passed any laws making it harder to get an abortion or not. And we pulled those data out for people just in states where in the last year they made it harder to get an abortion, and found that people in those states were largely unaware that those laws had passed. 4 in 10 were aware in those states, but the remainder either said they had not passed laws in their state or they didn't know.
I can vouch for that because that issue came up in my time in the state legislature, and when you went home, people weren't talking about it. They hadn't followed it. Roe v. Wade had just become, in their minds, the law of the land, and so they basically had put that on a back burner somewhere until now, and of course now it's all up again. You said these numbers mirror what they might have been 5 years, 10 years type ago. I mean, the analysis you did between polls?
Yeah, so that question was the first time we've asked it, so I don't have a comparison, but there's other questions we asked that I haven't brought up yet that we do have a comparison. One of I think, the deeper dive questions that we do ask pretty frequently is whether abortions should be legal or illegal in several different situations. The first one was if a woman's physical health is endangered. That question we've asked on and off, us and other pollsters, since 1996. And this time we found that 82% of people said that it should be legal if a woman's abortion should be legal if a woman's physical health is endangered. And that was the same as we saw in 1996. It was very similar to what we saw in 2012. Opinions really haven't shifted on that much at all. We also asked about whether if the abortion should be legal or illegal if the pregnancy was caused by rape or incest, and saw a similarly large share of Americans saying that it should be legal, 79% in this case. Again, very little motion in opinion on that question over time. We've asked it going back to 1989, and then 81% said it should be legal. So it really has not shifted. American opinions do shift on many issues, but this is not one of them.
What about the geography of where the questions were answered? Because as you know, the Midwest tends to be more conservative. The folks that are watching you right now might disagree with these numbers. Were they part of the sampling?
Yeah, we pull not just regional, but we also have urban, suburban, and rural breakdowns. For the Midwest specifically, we found 6 in 10 Midwesterners saying that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. That compares almost exactly with the U.S. overall, where 58%. In rural areas, 47% said abortion should be legal in all or most cases, which is much lower. The Roe versus Wade question, whether to uphold or overturn, 47% of people in the Midwest say that Roe should be upheld. 55% of Americans' rural areas agree. In the case of whether or not your state should make it easier or harder to have an abortion, in the Midwest, 30% said easier, 30% said harder, and 33% said left as is. That is almost evenly divided across the board. In rural parts of the country, plurality, 41% said that it should be left as is in their state, while 33% said it should be made harder, and 20% said it should be made easier. I can pull those breaks for other questions too, if you like.
Sure. Did you get into the issue of when you terminate the pregnancy? Whether it is at 12 weeks, whether it is, I mean, was that part of your sampling?
Yeah, we did ask questions because some of the new legislation in the history of asking, because you seem interested in the history of polling, which is great. We've asked about trimesters a lot, and we've also asked about months. But with this new legislation that we're seeing, a lot of it is written to make abortions legal only in the first 6 weeks of pregnancy or only in the first 15 weeks of pregnancy. And we found very similar numbers for both of those questions. A little less than 6 in 10 oppose both of those restrictions across the board. And I'm not sure, we don't have the breakdowns by region because those are half sample questions. Half of the sample got the question about 6 weeks and half of the sample got the question about 15 weeks. So in both cases, 36% supported bans after the first 6 or 15 weeks of pregnancy, while almost 6 in 10 opposed such a ban.
Okay. Let me ask this. Did you go beyond the abortion question itself? Did you get into what people's attitude, and this might have been prior, I get it, but their attitude was about the court itself?
So we've asked questions about opinion of the Supreme Court in the past. Generally, it has pretty high approval ratings. We didn't ask that in the survey, but Gallup has been tracking that for a while, and I know CNN asked about that recently as well. I just don't have those numbers memorized.
Okay. Emily, you're good at what you do, and the Post is very good at what it does. I'm a Washington Post fan, and the numbers are the numbers. As a radio talk show host and a TV host, I can tell you this. Those are the numbers in the Midwest. People who want to ignore, that's what the numbers are from the calls that come into me. Nobody wants to jump up and down and say, I'm for legal abortion, but when you get them behind a phone where they have that level of privacy, it does not surprise me that these are your numbers. So,
you're interested in polling survey methods. There is something to be said that sometimes people will try to sound like they want on telephones. Responses are sometimes a little different than online when people aren't being interviewed by an individual, which is a pretty interesting thing that we've learned in survey research. So doing telephone interviews have shown that it is reflective of what Americans think, but we can also do research online with different ways to randomly sample individuals online. That's tough to do too, but people can share their opinions without talking to an individual, can sometimes change things slightly.
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that a bit. Emily, you're busy today, and yet you gave us time. I appreciate that.